Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here, all of our guests and everyone on the live stream. We know that Europe's agricultural system runs on seasonal and migrant labor, yet too often the rights that are set out in legislation fail to materialize in the field. And in several areas, the policy architecture is not really designed to prevent the pressures that lead to exploitation. This is well documented and widely acknowledged. I've done myself as a journalist a lot of work on this matter. And so the question before us is not really whether the problem exists, but how can we actually strengthen policy, closing implementation gaps, and make compliance the default rather than the exception. Over the past few months, the Pickers campaign has toured across 6 countries and facilitated more than 300 special events with the documentary, from farms to churches to universities and parliaments. And the campaign has also been engaging with retailers, unions, civil society, and policymakers to really press for institutional changes rather than just symbolic empathy. Thousands of individual and organizational endorsements of the call to action, "We want a fair pick," has signaled to us that the concern for this issue is not really confined to just certain stakeholders or political camps, that a lot of citizens want to participate in this conversation. And the movie has circulated as a prompt for institutional discussion around labor standards, market rules, public money, accountability.
live stream. Devo dirlo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The documentary screenings usually leave a few simple questions. If we consider these conditions unacceptable, then what follows? What can we do? And if these conditions actually persist in a regulated sector, then what is missing in the chain of responsibility? Today, we will focus on how worker-driven social responsibility actually works as a system that redistributes power to workers and delivers enforceable rights in supply chains. We will start from the lived experience of the Fair Food Program, and then we will look at how this model and what this model could mean to Europe. This is the beginning of the conversation. We're here to learn together, and we want this event to be a dialogue as much as possible. So for this reason, I will ask structured questions to this remarkable group of panelists. I might also interrupt sometimes to clarify or push on parts that might be unclear to a European audience. But then at the same time, if you're in the room and want to contribute, then you can send one sentence in the chat. And Hannah, who maybe is here and says hello, Hannah will look through the questions and comments and then surface them at the right moments. First, we will watch 2 clips. Let's start with a clip from The Pickers, the documentary, with Bahia from Morocco, who went to Spain to pick strawberries.
Yo lo que quiero que toda Huelva se cambie todo, no solo un jefe. Soy Sumia Belfat Milgar. Me he trabajado durante años desde el 2005 hasta el 2022 en la fresa, y este año estoy trabajando en sindicatos. Hay muchas que se van trabajando el día de la mañana hasta la tarde, pero no reclaman. Tienes que callar y va como una borra y ya está, no tienes que hablar.
لا رجعي هنا باش نعاود لك كتفك شويه.
Informamos los derechos y si eso denunciamos la empresa pero sin dar nombres.
خدمت قلت لك في واحد الفينكا كارغاو فيها مغربي، هي ما تصيبي المغاربه، شتي المغاربه اللي تصيبيه خدام تما كارغاو، جا لعندي قال لي خاصك تصاحبي معايا. ما بغيتش انا نتصاحب معاه، خرجني من الخدمه، جرى عليا من الخدمه. اخر قلت له انا نخدم معاك، قال لي الا بغيتي نخدمك ونعطيك كونطرا تمشي معايا وتخلصيني في الكونطرا، تعطيني الفلوس.
نعسي معاه وتزيدي الفلوس من الفوق.
واش زعما قلتيها لشي حد ولا بقيتي زعما خازنه؟
لا، انا ما سكتش، انا ما صبتش لمن نمشي نعاود ونقول.
Well, there must be a better way. So for contrast, we're also going to show another clip, and we're moving from Spain to Florida, where the story is of the story of migrant workers had been equally desperate, but then they started organizing. Let's watch it.
Alejandrina picks tomatoes on a farm about 30 minutes away. She likes her job now and says she's treated with respect. But it wasn't always that way. Alejandrina came to Immokalee from Mexico more than 20 years ago. She was alone, just 14 years old, small, scared, and extremely vulnerable. She says it didn't take long for someone to take advantage of her. It happened at one of the first farms she worked at. She says her boss promised her a better job in a warehouse. But as soon as she got in his truck, he drove to a remote part of the farm, and she knew she was in trouble.
He told me if we don't do this the easy way, we'll do it the hard way. I was afraid and trembling. He tried to abuse me sexually, but he didn't get to because another worker heard me screaming and came to help me. The next day, the boss fired us both.
Agricultural workers are without a doubt the most vulnerable workers in the United States, and I would say across the world.
John S. Forms is co-owner of Sunripe Certified Brands, where Alejandrina works today.
Let's talk about reality here. This is farming, this is agriculture. Agriculture has, from the very early days of man farming and needing to have work, has been full of opportunities for abuse.
His family-owned farm is one of the largest in the U.S. and was the first to join the Fair Food program, an innovative initiative that has been held up as the most comprehensive social responsibility program in U.S. agriculture. Today, nearly every farm in Florida has signed on. The program combines a set of high standards that includes monitoring the farms and educating the workers.
Buenos días.
Leonel Perez works for the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, or CIW, a nonprofit organization that developed the Fair Food program. Today, CIW is holding a training session with farm workers, teaching them not only what rights they have, but what to do when those rights are violated. Leonel and the other educators here have first-hand knowledge because they are all former migrant farm workers themselves.
The
most important thing for me is to be able to talk to other workers because I have a shared experience. I work in the fields too, and now we can work together to end worker abuse.
The Fair Food program works because it has market consequences. If a farm violates the code of conduct, it is suspended from the program and cannot sell to participating buyers, which includes some of the biggest fast food restaurants and grocery stores. It all makes a big difference for those at the bottom of the supply chain, like Alejandrina.
You can work freely. You're not going to be harassed. You're not going to be insulted. You're not going to be forced to work. There's more respect now.
These days, Alejandrina wakes up in the morning happy to come to work, proud to talk to her kids about the company she works for. And that, she says, is the biggest change of all. Amara Walker, CNN.
Gerardo, I'd like to start from you. Gerardo Reyes is a farm worker, leader with the coalition of the Immokalee workers, and he spent years in the fields and was one of the central voices in the campaigns that confronted the abuse, wage theft, and sexual violence in U.S. agriculture. He has negotiated directly with growers and major corporate buyers, and so I'd like to ask you, Gerardo, we've seen a glimpse with this video, we heard a glimpse of what was happening, but what were the conditions in the fields, and How did workers organize to address them and to create the Fair Food program in the first place?
Well, thank you for the invitation. For us as a community, this fight started because of the poor conditions that included wage theft. Just in the first year that the coalition started, more than $100,000 were recuperated from stolen wages of workers. And in terms of the conditions that made the community have to organize for almost a decade, trying to sit with the growers to talk about elimination of violence in the fields. There were, even before the coalition started, 7 to 10 cases reported to the Florida Rural Legal Services. They estimated that for every case, there were 7 to 10 other cases that were not reported out of fear. Crew leaders would carry guns. So we lived as a community in a climate of fear and intimidation, situations of sexual harassment, as the case that we just saw in this short clip of Alejandrina, were very common, happening to most women in the fields. And if all of this wasn't, as if it were not enough, in the most extreme of conditions, workers were forced to work at gunpoint on the threats of death for them and their families on cases of modern day slavery. I got involved in '99 because I was invited to participate in the community meetings that the coalition was organizing, still trying to have dialogue with the growers. At that point, there were 3 general strikes with more than 3,000 workers each time, seeking dialogue to address the stagnation of wages that were the same since 1978 and would continue to be the same for the more than 30 years, 40 to 45 cents per a 32-pound bucket of tomatoes. No protections for workers because we're excluded from many of the protections that should be granted. When I went to this meeting, we participated in a march, 230-mile march, but something remarkable happening between 97 and 98 with a hunger strike by 6 workers that went without food for 30 days. And it became evident that the industry wasn't ready to sit at a table. One grower was asked, why not have dialogue with these growers, with these workers? And one of the growers said, a tractor doesn't tell a farmer how to run his farm. We also heard from the industry that they would not be able to pay because we were demanding an increase on the pay of the bucket and the elimination of all of these conditions. So I got involved. That was the second case of modern day slavery. And when we realized that the industry wasn't going to dialogue with us, we started to think about the market. We saw a publication on The Packer, which is a magazine for the agricultural industry. Taco Bell was talking about the relationship with some of the growers. So we thought we are going to reach out to them, thinking they would naturally want to partner with us to help us address all of these abuses. We were absolutely wrong. We realized that we needed to start a campaign. And that's when we started, because we realized that the agricultural industry is only a subset of the retail food industry as a whole. And the pressure that the industry places on top of the agricultural industry forces the industry to cut cost of production. And one way in which they have always done it was with withholding or not giving any increase to the workers for decades. So in that moment, we started to look up. We saw the retail industry and started with a boycott of Taco Bell after several attempts at dialoguing with them. That campaign, we started being completely alone. It took 4 years of national tours going across the country to the headquarters of Taco Bell in Irvine, California. And we connected with students, with religious leaders, with other groups of workers. And we were able to bring Taco Bell to the table in 2005. After that, We continued the campaign. We reached agreements with McDonald's in 2007, Burger King, Subway, and several other brands, to the point in which in 2010 we had enough buying power saying we're committing to the implementation of a code of conduct that would be created by us as workers and would include all the rights that were necessary to guarantee a dignified day of work. The second demand was to pay a premium that would address the sub-poverty wages that were always part of our lives. And we demanded a seat at the table. That's the beginning of what we call the Fair Food Program. And when we created the program, it was a change between night and day. On the very first day of the program, a crew leader that was accustomed to think that everything was just, I don't know, that it was just like a certification. They told workers that everything that they heard in the education session that for the first time took place in the fields without us being chased by the police. We went into the farm, talked to the workers, and a worker called us and say, they are forcing us to ignore what you told us in the education session. And they are forcing us to overfill the bucket, which was a way in which crew leaders would steal wages from workers directly by forcing them to overfill, and then they would get the profit out of that extra weight. When that happened, we were able to talk to the growers or this specific grower, and in the span of 24 hours, they basically gathered everybody and told them that if you want to keep thinking like you were in the past, then this is not the place for you to work. We're committed to the program, and we are going to enforce everything that it's included in the code. So that's how all of this started for us.
I mean, this sounds amazing and also very difficult. But when you talk about this, I can't not think about language as something that unites people and that helps them to negotiate, but also to come together. And in Europe, labor is multilingual, is fragmented. Of course, there's English, but not everyone knows English. So do you have any advice or ideas for what to do when workers actually don't share language? What can build trust, and could, I don't know, tools like instant translation apps meaningfully help, or is the real work actually offline work? And how could we do that with such a multilingual and fragmented workforce?
Well, the best approach is one-on-one, and it's something that we have always been very conscious about, both in organizing as the campaign was going on, as well as in implementing the program through the sessions of education. So our materials, for example, include booklets of Know Your Rights under the program in Spanish, Creole, also in English. And we also, in our staff, have colleagues that speak several languages, from indigenous languages from Guatemala, from Mexico. So that's the way in which we have been organizing. And I don't think that fear is a factor when you have the power of the market behind you. That's the beauty of the Fair Food Program. In terms of being able to keep people engaged with the program, I think that the results are the secret sauce. When you are able to tell a worker, you have these list of rights that are included as part of the program, and you're able to guarantee that when they pick up the phone and call you on the 24/7 hotline, that there's an investigation and a resolution following that. There's nothing more powerful than that. That's why for us it's very important to underscore the importance of workers being protected by a power like the market. And for us, that has worked wonderfully.
Absolutely. And I think definitely we need more efforts in making workers aware of their rights. Thank you so much. I would like to now move on to Greg. I'd like to come to you next. Greg Asbed is a principal architect of the Fair Food Program. He helped design the worker-driven social responsibility model, but also the idea the fundamental idea that rights enforcement is more effective when it begins with those that are most affected, and it's not something that we think top down. Greg, could you tell us what are the essential elements of the Fair Food Program, and how does a worker-driven model fundamentally differ from the corporate social responsibility model that we know and is applied in Europe?
Absolutely. I mean, you kind of started yourself by talking about the different architects, where it came from. So really, the CSR, the traditional CSR model differs from the new paradigm, the WSR model, in almost every way. Its structure, it's how it functions, and its results, as Gerardo was mentioning. And the reason they're so different is their origin stories. Right? I mean, when you just think quickly back to where CSR came from, it came from many decades ago when, for the first time, there started to be scrutiny of conditions in global supply chains, and that turned into consumer pressure on models and on brands and reputational harm for those brands. That was the inspiration for CSR, right? And so CSR was designed to fix that. It was designed at the top of the supply chain, born and conceived at the top of the supply chain, and designed to fix reputational harm. That is the way that CSR came to be. And WSR couldn't be more different. It's essentially the exact opposite. It was born, as you heard from Gerardo, it was born at the bottom of the chain. It was conceived of and built by workers, the rights holders themselves, the people whose rights we're talking about. And it was built not to deal with reputational harm, because reputational harm for brands is the last thing in workers' minds. It means nothing to workers. What matters is having your wages stolen, or being sexually harassed, or being humiliated or beaten at work. And so it was designed to stop those things from happening. It was designed to take one word and make it the whole for enforcement of human rights. And so that's reflected in the tools. And this graphic here is actually quite helpful, because the WSR model is a unique mix of tools. Going back to CSR for a second, we all know that CSR essentially is made up of two simple tools, right? A supplier code of conduct designed by buyers, right? These are the standards we expect our suppliers to meet, they say, right? And social audits, infrequent, fairly superficial social audits that are designed to say that, to tell the world we not only have standards that we require of our suppliers, but we actually monitor those standards. And here's how. And then those end up in certifications, which are what? Consumer-facing certifications, labels that consumers can see in the marketplace. So that's the package of tools you have for CSR. In WSR, this is the package. Right? And it's all designed to do the opposite. It's all designed to tap into the worker, the power that workers have, individual workers have in the workplace. Because when an abuse happens in a workplace, who's there? Who's there at the moment? Workers, the person being abused, right? And so, if you can find a way to essentially deputize, to help workers serve as frontline monitors of their own rights in the workplace 24/7 on a constant basis, then you can actually enforce, you can actually eliminate those problems and eventually prevent them. And that's what this does. So just quickly going around sort of from top, well, let's start in the middle. Because the middle is the foundation, right? You have the Fair Food Agreements, which are the agreements between the worker organization and the brands. And those agreements harness the purchasing power of the brands as the enforcement power of this program, right? So in short, if you are suspended as a supplier from this program for violations, you are suspended, the purchases from the buyers in the program are suspended as well. So you lose sale to the biggest buyers in the world. And that's the foundation of the whole thing. And that power is there to enforce the standards in the code of conduct. Right. So that's the center. That's the standards and the enforcement power. And then the function, the mechanisms around that sort of cloverleaf. Workers first. One thing that distinguishes the code in the Fair Food Program and the WSR model is that it's workers' lived experience that informs the code itself. So it's a worker drafted code as opposed to a corporate drafted code. And then when new workers are coming under farms where they are working under the program, they learn from veteran workers in a regular process done on the farm, on the clock, paid, about their rights under the code. That allows them to serve as informed monitors by using the complaint resolution mechanism, 24/7 complaint investigation and resolution mechanism, to address issues that they find. Likewise, going back to the left on the auditing, they can actually serve, they don't look at auditors as being aliens that they have no idea what they're doing in the workplace and where they come from and who they work for. They know that the auditors are there for the program, to strengthen the program. And so they work as partners with auditors, which is a huge difference. It completely changes the experience beyond, as Judge Laura will talk about, beyond the way that the auditing process itself is different. And then finally, that is all, going back to the agreements, bottom right, that is all supported by the market-based enforcement. And the way that works, the magic to this program, and I think Gerardo mentioned this, is in anywhere outside of this sort of program, workers fear complaining about problems that they encounter because they fear they will either lose their jobs or worse. That's just it.
Yeah.
And so in this case, that's taken away by the market enforcement, by the market consequences.
Yeah, I want to go back to that actually with you in just a couple of minutes, but I am aware that in the room there's Cristina Guarda, and she will have to leave in about 4 minutes. But she's a member of the European Parliament and has focused her work on agriculture, labor rights, the regulatory space where business, supply chains, and enforcement kind of intersect. And before she leaves, I'd like to ask her what she thinks of what she's hearing. And I'm not asking for visions or high-level goals, but actually Christina, where do you see concrete opportunities and roadblocks for a pilot like this in Europe?
So first of all, I want to thank you a lot for inviting me, because it is very important for me to listen to this kind of experience. I also see promising examples in Europe, like in Italy, that is my country. Migrants workers are increasingly taking leadership roles inside the agricultural branches of trade unions. And this is very important, because I feel that if we start to give to them space in order to defend the dignity of workers, it is more effective than taking care from our side only. So thank you very much for giving space also to all these type of experiences. I have to admit, yes, my agenda is full, but I need to say to you, this is a theme that needs all our attention, and this is a theme that needs to find other ways to discuss with the other part of the political framework in the European Parliament, obviously, but also in the local and national government, because I see that there is no care about the dignity of the others. And this means that also farmers and workers in farming sector are putting one against other. And this is not correct. This is unfair. And this is putting poor people against poor people. Not always, but in many cases, yes, it is. And for this reason, I think that where can we find space in order to boost this type of experience, the worker-driven social responsibility, this new concept that is overpassing the only social responsibility that didn't work enough, and especially in some parts of Europe. I think that maybe we need to boost personal relationship with politicians that are involved in this discussion. I feel that we need to use our force and our energy in the next CAP discussion, because it is not acceptable that simplification means less dignity and less care of the human rights and workers' rights. And so I feel that this discussion is an essential one to underline the importance of social responsibility, that it's not simplification doesn't mean deleting all the step forward that we did. And of course, we need to push on two other fronts, if I can. ensure enforcement, accountability, and real consequences for labor abuses in supply chain. And secondly, organize in an organization way at local level to guarantee migrant workers have the means, the means, structures, and protection to organize themselves. We are already seen these type of new structures, as I said before, but I feel that these two steps are really, really important in order to achieve something. In the meantime, we need to boost our personal relationship in the political level, at national and European level, but also locally. And we need to improve the strategy also with farmers. Because if we fight for the dignity for the both sectors and we don't think that we are separated in this battle, we might achieve something. And this is the only way, I think, because we need to create bridges between these two parts of the moons of the farming sector and not creating and not fight one against another. I think this is the most difficult challenge that we have, because I know that the farmers are not looking at the human rights respects for in their agenda. They have other priorities. But if we if we are not able to create this connection, I feel that we are not going to achieve anything in this particular political moment where the far right is taking power.
Yeah.
And what the and where yes, the political agenda is not human rights based.
Yeah,
couldn't agree more. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I also couldn't agree more, but I also think that it's so interesting that something so important to our economies, like paying correctly those who pick our food, would be the bottom of the list of priorities of so many politicians, unfortunately. And going back actually to knowing their rights, I want to go back quickly to Greg. Sorry for interrupting you earlier. But we've also seen in our investigations that many times there's a lot of cases that don't even surface because workers often don't report issues because they're afraid that they'll be deported, that they'll face serious consequences. Sometimes they even get hurt in the fields and decide not to go to the hospital. But many times they also fear what the employers might do in case there's no follow-up from a legal perspective. So can you go a little bit more into what happens when a complaint is verified and the company possibly refuses to fix it? How can workers feel protected in reporting?
Right. So the very most important thing is that one of the very most serious violations in the Fair Food Program is retaliation for the use of the complaint mechanism. Right. So if a worker does complain and then faces retaliation, that's an immediate, that has to be remedied immediately before anything else happens, so that we can actually move through to get to the violation and the investigation and resolution of the violation itself. Retaliation is everything. If you can remove the fear of retaliation, you can change essentially all the problems in the fields. If you can't, you won't be able to. It's just that simple, right? So in terms of what happens if a grower refuses to fix a violation, when the Fair Food Standards Council, for example, has done an investigation and reached a finding that there was a violation, it depends on the violation. And in a sense, it depends on what the word refuses means, because there's refuses at first where the grower says, hey, I don't agree with this. And we need to. And in that kind of situation, the FFSC will work through the conversation, will work through the process. They'll reach an agreement on a corrective action plan, and the grower will eventually implement that. And then if need be, they'll audit behind that to make sure that it was in fact implemented, right? So that there's a refusal, which is just reluctance, and that's understandable. It happens all the time. If it's a refusal, this blank, absolute, I will not fix this, then almost any violation will become a zero tolerance violation, because you can't have a system where any given grower can choose any given violation and say, no, I'm vetoing that as part of the program. Every violation has its importance, and every grower has to comply with all of them. So a grower cannot refuse to fix when the Fair Food Standards Council has found a violation and remain in the program, and they know that, and so they fix. I mean, it's not. But I want to go back to what she was saying earlier, that the most important thing is that this is actually quite collaborative. This is, I mean, it's got the power of the market. We have suspended growers. It's, you know, the fact that this program will suspend growers either for zero tolerance violations automatically or for other violations they don't fix is established, and the growers know that, right? But it's also established that we'll go out of our way to help growers fix, because the most important thing is to have a better workplace where workers have access to the Fair Food Program. Right, so you don't want to suspend if you don't have to suspend. If there's no future of actual compliance, then suspension is the way to go. But if there is a future of compliance and you can help make it happen, we spend infinite resources doing that, and Judge Laura can talk more about that fact in the next section. But the bottom line is, this program doesn't work without the market consequences behind it. But if those are very rarely needed to be used, what we do is create a win-win-win situation for everybody involved. And that's the important thing, because when you fix the violations, that's obviously a win for workers, right? Just know that's just a straight win for workers. They're no longer being sexually harassed. They're no longer having their wages stolen. But when you do that, you also help the supplier, because those things create, you know, class action lawsuits or regulatory fines and that sort of thing, which raise the cost of production for the growers. And so you have to, you know, when you stop doing that, like we have done in the Fair Food Program, we have 0 lawsuits, we have 0 regulatory fines for 15 years. It's an incredible result. Then that helps the grower. And then of course that helps the buyer, because the reputational harm stops. So the only way to actually help everybody in the chain is by eliminating the violations at the bottom of the chain. There's no other way to do it. And that's what this program does. So it works for everybody. And as she was saying earlier, that in this particular climate today, that's hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I want to go back to that win-win-win in a moment. But in the meantime, I'd like to do 2 things. One, I'd like to ask Hannah to start gathering maybe some questions if we have them. And in the meantime, I would like to ask actually Christian Moeller from Appellando, who's in the room, if trying to establish a grievance framework like Appellando can actually take inspiration from what Greg was just saying right now.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me here today. I think that as so many of those things, just doing the opposite sounds like you know, a song in my ears, because after having been working for 20 years in certification, I knew with the global gap standard, we had the power of the market. If you had a withdrawn certificate in food safety, well, you're not gonna supply anymore. So that is an experience. We wanted to introduce auditing, social auditing, very early in 2000, 2003. We actually withdraw from that because we saw the risk auditing and social isn't the recipe to really get to compliance. So we would threaten the effectiveness of a food safety audit when you have maybe a failure in the social where it doesn't grip and it's all in the same sort of framework. I think the power of buying is important. So, but what we are having in Europe, and when we compare that, I think the inspiration is a model where a collaboration really takes place to bring the dignity. I would call it dignification of supply chains instead of certification of supply chains. When we do this, like what you're doing, I think the idea is to bring the level playing field in terms of bring the most vulnerable people at the table and discuss it with them. And what we have in Europe is the supply chain due diligence legislation. That's what Christina was telling about. That will really encourage the buyers now to take action. Even though it may reduce a little bit now, but the good role model, what you're doing, I think will help and encourage companies, but also trade unions, which are well established in some areas, and as well those social civil society organizations, social NGOs, to see that it works, that you can really do the dialogue, right? I think that is a great role model. And and that is my last point here, and we can discuss further. I think the educational piece, etc., we're trying with multiple languages, with micro training, to really try to overcome that, to bring that level of education, and then also having different programs depending on the risk of the situation to recognize them. Yeah, Appellando, we are a sort of collaboration of these type of programs. So, inviting you as well to Europe, be part of that here could help to bring a much bigger coalition of buyers that see the benefit. You don't have to do all the sales pitch to all the buyers again, rather than collaborating in an existing sector framework, which is, by the way, part of the legislation. The LORIC asked for the opportunity to join a sector initiative. That's really where the aggregate buying purchasing power is.
Yeah.
At Appellando, we have about 20 billion euro annual buying purchasing power for fruits and vegetables, just aggregated in this, and this is just Germany, and maybe and Switzerland. So I think that's the opportunity. So I'm very pleased to see this. I've observed your activities for quite some time, spoke to growers in Florida already, etc. So I'm looking forward to see that this is also bringing a very nice momentum in the drive here, what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Christian. Hannah, by the way, feel free to jump in from now on if there's any questions that come through. And I'd like to remind everybody that you can leave questions, but even if they're not questions or they're reflections, perplexities, just leave them in the box, in the chat, and then Hannah will bring them to us. But next, I would like to go back to that sort of win-win-win scenario that Greg was talking about earlier. And I would like to ask Ariadna Rico something about the most important results for the programs. Ariadna works for the Fair Food Standards Council, and she leads on monitoring and worker complaints. So she's part of the team that speaks to workers every day, investigates abuses in real time, and ensures that growers and buyers follow their commitments. So my question to you is, what do you think have been the most important outcomes of the Fair Food programs, Fair Food program, practically, concretely?
Thank you, Silvia, and thank you so much for having me. And also, thank you for saying my name right. That's awesome.
Yay.
So as we've been speaking, right, because you've heard and saw the videos, right? I think what workers in agricultural sectors face internationally is very, very similar and has been historically, right? So to go from 14 years of implementing the Fair Food program, from the conditions that Gerardo was describing, right? Like a pretty contentious and kind of like antagonistic relationship, to building a partnership of benefits, right? For workers, for growers, for buyers and consumers alike. I've lived it. I've seen how growers have seen the benefit, right? So it's not convincing them. If you can convince their hearts, right? You have the power of the market, and that moves them towards working with us to solve the issues at the bottom of the supply chain, like Greg was explaining, right? So with the program's unique focus on enforcement, which we know is backed by the incentives and the enforcement of the market, there is this power of the purchasing order of over 14 leading retail food brands that have signed agreements with the Fair Food program. So workers can confidently report issues without fear of retaliation. And then growers know about these problems more swiftly, they can address them and learn how to prevent them in the first place. And then buyers can trust that they have a secure and ethical supply chain. So from the conditions that were once described, when Gerardo was explaining the history of where the Fair Food program came, those fields in Immokalee were known as ground zero for modern day slavery. And just in a few years of implementing the Fair Food program, those fields were transformed and those work environments were transformed into what the New York Times put on the front page of their paper as the best work environment in US agriculture. So it's been 14 years of implementation, and we bring our history of our experience in that implementation as a Fair Food Standards Council. We are the ones doing the auditing, manning and womaning the 24-hour hotline. And since 2011, when the program started, it has expanded beyond the Florida tomato industry to protect the rights of thousands of workers across 21 states in the US. And that is also into other countries in Chile and South Africa. And that covers 51 grower operations. And we know all growers are not the same, right? So there's a grower with multiple farms across states, and then farms that are more family run and have one operation. But it's basically, we're covering at this point over 46 types of crops and products. And that shows that the model has the flexibility as long as you have those components to go into different crops, into different work environments. So concretely for workers, what we have seen is the elimination of forced labor and violence against workers, including sexual assault. We developed with the working group with growers and in our partner in Mexico, a clean channel of recruitment for those workers that are coming on agricultural visas domestically to the US. We've accomplished vast improvements on work environment for workers, including the prevention of sexual harassment, discrimination, and dangerous working conditions by developing or fortifying, health and safety protocols with the growers. We have banned the worst actors and practices in the participating farms. And with the Fair Food Program premium that participating buyers pay, which we monitor from buyer to grower to workers, there has been over $50 million in Fair Food Program distributions that go to workers' paychecks as a separate line item. And additionally, with complaint resolutions, we have recovered almost $700,000 for workers through those complaints. There's active health and safety committees at participating farms. Almost 100,000 workers have been educated on their rights under the law, under the Fair Food Program. And for the 14 years that we've implemented the program, we have received over 4,500 complaints on our 24-hour hotline. So if you're good at math, you can see that on average we are opening one case per day in our databases. So it is a hotline that is actually being used. Almost over 50% of those complaints we are able to resolve in less than 2 weeks, and over 70% of them get resolved in a month or less. Also, as growers, we've been speaking about their benefits too. They recognize that the purchase of participating buyers is something that is a benefit, right? But it's also something that maybe they were not expecting at the beginning of the program, and the relationship and partnership with the Fair Food Standards Council inside the Fair Food Program. It was that they would become employers of choice for workers because they were seeing these work environments are more dignified and they're improved. So their workforces suffer less turnover. They are preventing risk and improving upon their management systems because we work with the growers. We meet them where they are, right? Like we've talked about how not all growers are the same, right? So like a multi-operational grower can have better systems for HR versus a smaller farm, right? So we are not like a cookie cutter solution-based monitoring agency. We truly consider growers our partner, and we talk to them and negotiate corrective action plans to meet growers at their context, right? Because what we ultimately want is solutions to the problems that workers are facing. So and then for growers, they obtain verification of ethical labor practices vetted by the Fair Food Program, the gold standard for social responsibility in the food industry today. For buyers, there is a benefit in transparency and elimination of risk in their supply chains. And this is particularly important at a time where consumers have access to immediate information. So they are increasingly demanding to know the conditions under which their products are being produced, and they want ethical labor practices.
Thank you so much, Ariadna. And yeah, I definitely want to go back to the side of the grower soon, but I saw that maybe Hannah has a point to bring up.
Hi, thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, I'm just stepping in also to encourage others from posing any questions that they would like in the chat. Maria-Aline Cornu from ECBC Fugea, who was also a great participant at our European parliamentary event a couple of weeks ago, was just responding to Christian's remark and saying that an important part of the work is collaborating with like-minded communities to increase bargaining or lobbying power. And I think, it speaks to everything we've just said in terms of reducing silence and facilitating a conversation where people feel that they can be as informed as possible, and also that they have the power to step out of silence, which is the biggest weapon against them. That's for the chat. And if anyone else, there is another question that's come up.
There's also quite a few questions from Marie. So maybe we could ask her to directly pose one of them to start.
I got a few
curious about.
Again, we'll see how much time we have. First, I wanted to ask other companies, the market companies like McDonald's and so on, collaborating to pay higher prices that cover the production cost and the labor cost, because that's often a big problem in Europe. I know how it is, and already for farmers, it's very difficult to get a fair pay. So very often they don't have enough money to pay the labor and the rural workers. So how does it work with the Fair Food program?
Okay. Thanks for the question. It's an important one. In the Fair Food program, as Adi was explaining, there is a premium that is paid by all participating buyers, and the bulk of that, the vast majority of that, goes to workers to supplement substandard wages. So in other words, the employer receives the benefit of having a wage increase for its workforce, but does not come out of their own pocket. And beyond that, a smaller percentage is dedicated to the farmer themselves to cover any administrative costs and improvements that they need to make. In the Fair Food program, this is a relatively small percentage, but it is still very valuable and appreciated by the participating growers. There are other WSR programs in which the capital investments by the employer needed to be greater. For example, in the dairy industry, housing was abominable. And so really big infrastructure investments had to be made in some cases. And so there, the premium paid by the participating buyer is divided differently, and it does cover many of those costs. In other words, the same logic applies that Gerardo talked about, the downward pressure from the top of the supply chain, putting both farmers or employers in the agricultural food supply chain are on the same side of that downward pressure. The employers and the workers, they're on the same side of that equation. And this structure really recognizes that. And although obviously there is some tension in getting employers to make changes to their system, ultimately, this is an extremely collaborative model that recognizes that farmers are also under that pressure.
Thank you so much to both. And actually, I just read a comment from Christian who said certification programs, in particular on food safety and environmental aspects, remain an important component for compliance for buyers. That is why for us it is important to have a close collaboration with them for mutual benefit and continuous improvement. And actually, this leads very well to what I wanted to ask next, because sometimes there's the feeling that European companies think that due diligence is reporting, and I am curious about how the program helps companies meet their human rights due diligence responsibilities while also bringing more concreteness to workers. And we just heard Judge Laura Safre Espinosa. I don't know if it's Laura or Laura.
I answer to either. But yeah.
Okay. She's the executive director of the Fair Food Standards Council, and she oversaw the enforcement side of the Fair Food program from the beginning. She's a former New York State judge, so she brings a legal mindset to the table. And so I wanted to ask you, Laura, how do WSR programs remediation mechanisms for workers' complaints actually help companies fulfill those human rights due diligence responsibilities in their supply chains?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and thank you to everybody for your interest and your participation here today. I think the easiest way to answer that question is to say that in joining WSR programs, corporations at the top of supply chains have actually enlisted hundreds of thousands, and in some cases, as in the garment industry in Asia, millions of due diligence monitors with the greatest expertise possible. As Greg pointed out, who is it that is always present when abuses are committed, aside from the abuser, that is? And really, who intimately experiences the systems and the power dynamics that lead to the worst violations? The Fair Food Program, or WSR model, instead of the typical social certification program that just relies on annual audits and self-assessments that may or may not accurately capture a snapshot of conditions at a moment of time, the WSR model empowers each and every worker to be a frontline monitor of their own workplaces. And they're empowered because the program's enforcement mechanisms protect them from retaliation. I think we've said this multiple times, but really it bears repeating, because if you remember nothing else from everything that I say and my colleagues say, please remember that due diligence standards without enforcement are virtually meaningless. So in WSR programs, these informed and empowered worker monitors are really prepared to engage with the program's formal monitoring mechanisms. So whether it's during audits, where at least 50% of the workforce is interviewed in the field outside the presence of supervisors, or through calling the program's 24/7 multilingual complaint hotline, workers can speak to investigators whose sole mission is to monitor and enforce the program's code of conduct. And because those auditors are not paid by the suppliers and therefore do not have built-in conflicts of interest, they're able to be objective finders of fact. So the same monitors who carry out audits also respond to the 24/7 complaint hotline, and they're therefore very familiar with the situations that workers are calling about. It's really the opposite of a cold call center. So importantly, the monitoring organizations of WSR programs are empowered to work collaboratively and confidentially with suppliers in order to resolve code violations or risks. It is really important to understand this. This is not a game of got you or exposing the growers, the suppliers to greater risk. It is helping them in a collaborative manner to resolve issues in their operations in recognition of what we were just talking about, that they are on the same side of the downward pressure from the top of the supply chain. But given the program's market consequences and incentives, suppliers are really highly motivated to cooperate. And that's why complaints are resolved at lightning speed. And I was a sitting judge for 20 years compared to a judicial proceeding or an administrative proceeding where people wait years or months. This is truly remarkably efficient. And, justice delayed is justice denied, especially when we're talking about a migrant workforce. But beyond that, and Natalie, if you could put up the first slide, as you can see from this chart, really WSR programs are extremely effective at risk prevention. It's very good to have speedy resolutions of issues, but complaint resolutions also mean that somebody has already suffered, and often many people. So the shared goal behind due diligence should be prevention of suffering at the bottom of supply chains, which also translates into prevention of reputational harm. And it's clear from the results and compliance trends that many employers were aware of the bad actors and the bad practices in their operations. And once the incentives were changed, it was no longer profitable to allow those abuses to continue. So they were eliminated in a remarkably rapid time frame. You can see the upward curve here. But zooming out and to, start wrapping it up, it is critical to realize that none of these mechanisms that we've been talking about would be possible without the commitments that buyers are making at the top of the supply chain. The promise of purchasing preference for compliance with program standards and just the potential consequence of having purchases cut off for zero tolerance offenses or for failing to cooperate with the program. It's highly motivating for suppliers, and it's what protects each and every worker like Alejandrina from the fear of retaliation. So the next slide. But as you can see, the overwhelming majority of violations are resolved without escalation to the program's participating buyers. In the Fair Food Program, for example, now we're in our 15th year of implementation, and remarkably, over 16,000 corrective actions have been implemented successfully, and less than a dozen escalations to participating buyers were necessary in all those years. And the last slide is my favorite one because it really demonstrates the elimination and prevention of abuse. As I think we can probably all agree, the best cases are the ones that never happen. And that is the result of program enforcement. And this is beneficial for everyone throughout the supply chain.
Thank you so much, really. This is a great model, undeniably, and that's why I'm curious how it could be exported elsewhere, how it could be exported in Europe, and how the model can remain true to its core while also adapting to different contexts. And so I think in the room, Ganga Sekar would be a great person to ask these questions to, because she's part of the India Sugar Industry Workers Association, and she's taking that worker-driven approach into a very different context, including India's sugar sector, where we know that the supply chain is scattered, seasonal, highly vulnerable. So, Ganga, what is attracting ISWA to this worker social responsibility model?
Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. I'll get straight to the point. I mean, besides all the reasons that Greg and Judge Laura have just explained, the context of sugar in India, I don't want to go too much into the bonded labor system that exists there. That has been widely covered by the media recently, a series by the New York Times. There are some really gross human rights violations in the sugar sector. And the region that we're working in Maharashtra, just one small region, has over 1 million workers migrating for sugar harvesting, and the entire system, sugar harvesting, is based on the bonded labor, debt bondage system. What attracted us to WSR? Well, before we became ISWA, the Indian Sugar Workers Association, the bunch of us who came together on this issue, we come from our experience of having worked on debt bondage for many, many years. We worked to prosecute, we've worked on the rescue model, we worked as activists. There are experiences of having operated helplines, charitable endeavors, so many different experiences, and we know that it doesn't work. We also, this group also has the experience of having organized in the garment sector, where we all know that any voluntary mechanism also doesn't work. I mean, the Ali factory, which caught fire in Pakistan, was given an AOK on fire safety before it caught fire and killed 200 workers. And so also in Bangladesh, when two certifiers, I think, had certified, all's good in before the building collapsed. So we know from our experience, we've also used third-party grievance mechanisms for various violations that brands offer. And we've come from this experience of having tried all of these different methods and having seen and experienced that they don't really transform labor relations. And one encounter with CIW, and it was very instinctive that we know that to transform the entire sector, and most importantly, the enforcement mechanisms. We want legally binding enforcement mechanisms, not voluntary measures or codes of conduct. And we are rooted in, like, we have trade unionists with us, we have worker organizations, and we know that the bottom-up approach, workers are best placed to articulate their rights and to implement them. So we want the code of conduct, which is at the heart of the WSR model, written up by the workers themselves, and that can be legally binding and enforceable. And along with all of the measures that we've just heard about, the worker education program, the audits and the helplines for the retaliation, and for all of these reasons, and from our own experience of having seen that stopgap band-aid measures. I mean, we don't want to indulge in those sort of band-aid approaches. So that was our motivation behind, bringing the worker-driven social responsibility model in the sugar sector.
Thank you so much. Can I ask you as a quick follow-up?
Yes.
What do you think the biggest issues, well, not issues, but say what the greatest challenges you see in implementing this model in media and sugar?
One thing is, of course, the model does depend on, buyers coming forward. So that's where we are at, for buyers to come forward and start this program. And I also had these questions previously in another webinar. There is also this maybe this thing at the back of people's mind that it might not work in India for some reason, but we also have to change that mindset that it can work anywhere. And we are integrated
nothing
in the
specific
global
to
supply
India.
chain.
I'm just thinking about Italy and thinking that it's
sure, of course,
there's challenges in each of our countries, I think. And
yes, we need
on Italy, on the Italian side. I know that in the room there's Peppe Pugliese from SOS Rosarno, and he in the movie he sets a positive example. And so I was wondering what your impressions are so far, hearing all of these different people and stakeholders speak.
Hello, you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you for the organization of this call, and thank you for having us to it. First of all, I want to apologize for my spaghetti English. I hope you will understand me
perfectly.
And I'm so sorry because I joined the call a bit late, because I am in a warehouse now. We are working hard, and the orange has to leave tonight and tomorrow, so I don't have so much time, and I am so sorry for that. I don't know what you said before I joined the call, but I want to share with you the results of our analysis and our practice in order to fight against the exploitation of workers. And I want to add about the exploitation of producers, because in most of cases, producers and employers are the same. You understand what I mean? And I want to just make an example. I want to share with you what for us is the main point of the situation. The main point of the situation is the price paid to the producer. I talk about fruit, because we produce orange and clementines and tangerines and lemons. So last year, the fruits that have been sold in the supply chain in the big chain of supermarket, the clementines have been paid 30 cents per kilo. With the harvest on the producer. You spend at least 30 cents to produce 1 kilo of clementines. And if you make contract, 13 cents for the harvest. So 30 plus 13 is 43. If you sell at 30, there is nothing to do and there is nothing to say. Until we don't put our focus on how it works in the so-called free market, who decide the prices, we have to dismantle a war between poors. I don't know if in English is the same way of
understandable. Yes.
Of our speech. Until a producer is forced to decide between abandoning the production or save money where is possible to save money, we will not solve this problem. So the price paid to the producer is the first point. And we, our organization, SOS Rosano, we are not the best organization to talk about it because we don't have this problem. If we do what we do, it is because we sell what we produce directly to buyers without any step in the middle, without any intermediation, without any brokers, at a fair and clear price. So that's why we can do that. Otherwise, we couldn't do that. And this is the explanation of that. The only way is to establish a price, a minimum price paid to the producer. If there is not something that in Italian we call indice di congruità, it means I have to explain if I sell my orange or my clementines 30 cents per kilo, I have to explain how can I make a contract, how can I respect workers, and how can I pay correctly and according to the law the workers. If I sell as we do, we give 90 cents, €1 to the producer. So the producer, he doesn't have any alibi. Can I say alibi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is not a justification. This is an analysis. I hope you.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Clear. So if we have, for instance, that is really important in every supermarket, in the label of the fruit, you have some information. What is the fruit, the price you are paying, and the quality, if it's organic or not, if it comes from Italy or from outside UE. And we ask since 15 years, we demand that in that label, there must be also the price paid to the producer. So people can see that are buying 1 kilo of orange for €3 and the producer gets 30 or 40 cents. So even people who is not expert of these issues can note this huge difference.
Yeah.
I hope.
Thank you so much. No, that's a very important point. I saw that Hannah wanted to maybe bring something up because there's a lot going on right now in the chat.
Thank you so much, Pepe. Thank you so much, Sylvia, and everyone who's spoken so far. It's been really great hearing you all. I just want to mention that because the actual chat is not live, it would be beneficial to everyone who is watching and to the actual recording that the conversation between Marie-Aline and Judge Laura could maybe be vocalized. So if you feel like maybe you want to step in, Laura, and and continue what you were saying to Marie-Aline, it would benefit everyone.
Sure. Regarding funding, are we talking about? So people were
Yes, the
curious.
last questions.
Yeah, people were curious about funding. We do have a wide variety of funding sources from major institutional philanthropy, as well as private donations, as well as annual payments by some of the participating buyers and smaller food chains who cannot be participating buyers but want to support the program, have an annual sustainer program whereby consumers of conscience pay what they can on a monthly basis because they want to see all of their food be fair food. We do not touch the premium, and in response to the last speaker, your point is extremely well taken, and this is this is why the Fair Food Program operates based on market incentives and rewards for participating growers in recognition of the pressure and the pressure from the market, from the top of the supply chain that you are pointing out. So they receive not only purchasing preference, but we know that in the market, Fair Food Program produce brings higher value for them, not because we mandate that, but that is just the operation of the market because they have made a commitment to purchase with preference from those suppliers. And I know Greg wants to say something.
Yeah, just because the whole price conversation is important. And it's in fact it's the analysis that gave birth to the Fair Food Program. I mean, it's that important to us because for years, for almost a decade, we actually did what workers always do, which was workers aren't making enough money, they're being abused, they need to strike, withhold their labor, and bring the growers to the table to negotiate a new. But after about a decade, we realized that we could only make marginal changes that way because the resources weren't there for the growers, for the farmers, to actually meet the kinds of changes that the workers were asking for. They just couldn't do it. What we realized was that what we saw first was that the growers and the farms and agriculture was the entire world. It was the whole picture that we needed to be dealing with. Then we slowly realized that it's actually just a small subset of the food industry as a whole. And the food industry as a whole is much more powerful than the agricultural industry in which Immokalee workers worked. And so that's when we developed the program, the Campaign for Fair Food, calling on the buyers at the top to both pay a premium so they could address the issue of the wages that they had been driving down by driving prices down. Because when you can drive price down through volume purchasing power, then you drive wages down for workers. Because workers in the world of growers, workers are the only partner that can't negotiate for itself. It just doesn't have the power to do so. And so when you're trying to keep margins, that's where it comes from. So we said, buyers, you have to pay that, right? The other thing we do is we don't charge for the audits to the producer, which is extremely rare, if not entirely rare, in the world of certifications. The Fair Food Program does not charge the growers a penny for the audits. We get that through the other funding sources that Judge Lawrence has explained. Again, because we know that the growers don't need an additional cost to be able to fit into this program. So we 1,000% agree with the analysis that the volume purchasing power of the buyers makes misery for all the pores at the bottom of the industry that don't have the negotiating power to change that, right? And so we're fully on the side of that. There are limits to our power though. We can't demand that they pay higher prices to growers. Growers have to do that ultimately themselves. And in Florida, they can. In Florida, they do. And they have an association that's free from some of the regulations around negotiating collectively. And they pass things like surcharges when they need a higher price. But there's a limit to what they can do because there are other countries supplying the same things they do. And that competition from those other countries, which is based on further exploitation of workers, worse human rights conditions for workers in Mexico, for example, that drags down conditions in the United States.
Thank you all so much. I'd like to use maybe the last 10 minutes we have to focus on practical advice for Europe. As you know, we're touring Europe with the campaign. We're based in Europe, and so we're curious about what Europe is missing out on and what it could do, whether there's any pilots that have been done in Europe, and what do you think are the next steps to establish this sort of model here? Open the floor. I mean, I know that there's a few people in this Zoom room that have not spoken yet. So if they want to say something, I would prioritize them. Yes, Katerina.
Yeah, if I might. Yeah, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for the whole course discussion. So I come from advisory center from Germany, where with Fair Farm Labor initiative, we, as a network of advisory centers, advise migrant workers in their first languages and seasonal workers in agriculture and their labor rights. But we also, what we have in Germany is a corporate sustainability due diligence law, which also kind of obliges big companies to combat human rights violations in their chains, supply chains, and which is for me was also always very a bit of complicated in the question of agriculture, because when we hear from farmers that they cannot negotiate better prices with big supermarket chains, then how can we influence the situation from this starting point? And going to a big supermarket chain and saying that the farmers don't pay fair wages seems somehow problematic if you know that they often don't pay fair wages because they don't get fair prices on their product. It's something which colleague from SOS Rosano already said, but also which was also very interesting from the perspective of Fair Food Program and how you managed to regulate this question. So thank you for that. And I also maybe wanted, because there's a lot of people working in this area, I also wanted to add some maybe a couple of words about our initiative. So we also go to the fields. We look on the Google Maps for asparagus fields, for example, where we go to speak to the people. We give away handouts and leaflets where they can get our hotline and also get call us. It is financially mostly through German state, but partially also through trade unions, which we are working very close with. And as fair mobility and fair farm labor initiative is already existing for a couple of years, it's actually also quite effective in what we are doing in Germany. It is also kind of set an example for other countries. And there is a Fair European Labor Mobility Project, which also makes advisory centers in Eastern European countries for workers there, so they can get advice before coming to Germany, for example, or other Western European countries, and after coming back home. So there are advisory centers in Bulgaria, Serbia, Slovenia, Poland, Romania, where advisors also go to remote villages and speak to people who are only getting prepared to going abroad and already getting advice there. So it's kind of something which is good to have in mind if you come across in Europe of workers coming from these countries, that there are such advisor centers which work closely with trade unions in their home countries and can get legal advice for free from them. So this is
Katerina.
Oh, sorry.
Just quickly, just directly in response. Do you know the organization Aztec? They're from Ecuador. They're a banana harvester organization. They recently came back from Germany, and they had a delegation visiting with government and business. And it's what they're trying to do is the same thing as ISWA in India. They're trying to build a WSR program. And as Ganga said, the biggest problem is getting the buyers on board. And so they spoke with some buyers in Germany that made all the right noises. They said all the right things, but then they ended up saying no. we're not interested. And that is the limiting factor to this working, is getting buyers to be willing to sign binding agreements that commit them to helping raise wages for workers through a premium and committing their purchases. So it feels like we should definitely find a way to work together, because what I understood you just saying right now was that you could provide a sort of consultant or whatever, sort of a guide to the world there in Germany. And I know Aztec and we, because we're working with them closely, and ISWA, the same thing there in Germany, would really benefit from that sort of relationship. So I just wanted to quickly say that.
Thank you so much to both. We have time for one last remark, possibly from someone who hasn't spoken yet. But if there's no, I don't know if Pyroots or Michelle want to say anything, or Andrea. Otherwise, from anyone else, or we can wrap it up. Anything that we haven't touched upon in terms of like concrete next steps for Europe? If not, Hannah, yes.
I mean, you might be leading on to this, Sylvia. I just wanted to say that one of the next steps that we could take on what we were proposing is, this is maybe not the last meeting that we have, is the first of maybe several in which this group could grow and the conversation could get wider and it could be fed from this initial point. So with that in mind, maybe leaving this conversation with the possibility of this being an ongoing and progressive sort of input space for Europe, and how we could implement this in Europe.
Absolutely, this is the start of the conversation. I would like to thank you all again, and I would also like to invite you all to watch the Pickers in full. There's a unique online event on Monday, the 15th of December at 7 p.m. Central European Time. And then this will be followed by a stakeholder discussion that you're all welcome to join. And if you're interested, you can register for the event at the campaign at the website campaign.thepickers.org/online. Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong.
I've just put it on the chat if anyone wants to write on the chat there.
But
and also we have
one hand raised.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yes, let's go with that, and we will close with your comment.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. I wasn't also present from the get-go of this call, so if my comment has been addressed already, but I just wanted to have a particular attention on the racial aspect of migrant labor. And from my understanding, I think we can inspire ourselves a lot from the US while theorizing about the racial aspect on migrant labor and the impact, the differentiated impact that it has on racialized folks. And I think that the research has been going on in Europe, may it be in Italy, in Spain, have tried to shed a light on that, but there's also countries like Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands where this aspect is often under highlighted. And I think, yeah, as a way forward also for this European work, and if this space is going to continue being a space where we try to reflect further on that, I think it's a really very important point to address within the European Union, that those who are working our lands are usually people that are racialized, and so that comes above all the, let's say, forms of oppressions. And this is often not reflected in the recommendations that we formulate towards the European Union. So it's just an invitation to also keep that in mind, that it's not always a simple link to be made when we discuss these issues. And yeah, I want to inform also everyone that the Horizon Europe calls are coming. And as the NGOs are more and more being, let's say, deprived from their public support, from their public fundings, we need to find ways to fund ourselves continue existing and continuing putting these issues on the table. And I've seen multiple Horizon calls where they want more research and more innovations when it comes to these kinds of questions. So it's also an invitation to everyone to, if you are interested in doing that work, to contact me or to stay in touch with each other, because it's also more of a European issue. It's also something like labor laws. Even though they're often nationally, and here in Europe, it's often a national competence. There are things we can do on the European level and that we should do on the European level as well. And the due diligence law is one of those things. But yeah, I'll keep it brief, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And I think, again, since this is the beginning of the conversation, the hope is also that maybe someone in Europe can, who knows, partner with the Fair Food Program, and maybe some collaborations can be born out of these encounters. I would like to thank you all again, and to maybe ask you if you'd like to sign the call for a fair pick. I know that it's been posted in the chat. And have a great evening or rest of the day, you all, depending on where you are. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for gathering us. It's very important and it's very interesting.
Thank you so much for coming.